Okay, we are in chapter 3. The title is 30 Scalps. I want you to think about the end of what happened in the last chapter. Remember, little bear has a tepee. He's not all happy about it. And he got a blanket, part of his sweater. So now we're going to go into this chapter, 30 Scalps. What do you think happens in this chapter? Within a few minutes, loud snores, well, not loud, but loud for the Indian, began to come out of the tepee. But Omri, sleepy as he was himself, was not quite ready for bed. He had an experiment to do. He had figured it out so far that the cupboard or the key or both together brought the plastic things to life. Or, if they were already alive, turned them into plastic. There was a lot of questions to be answered, though. Did it only work with plastic? Would, say, wooden or metal figures also come to life if shut up in the cupboard? How long did they have to stay in there for the magic to work? Overnight? Or did it happen right away? And another thing, what about the objects? The Indian's clothes, his feathers, his knife, all had become real. Was this just because they were part of the original plastic figure? If he put, well, let's say anything you like, the despised plastic tepee, for instance, inside to the cupboard and locked the door, would that become real in the morning? And what would happen to a real object if he put it in? He decided to do a double trial. He stood the plastic tepee tent on the shelf of the cupboard. Beside it, he put a matchbox car. Then he closed the cupboard door. He didn't lock it. He counted slowly the 10. Then he opened the door. Nothing happened. So he closed the door again, and this time he locked it with his great-grandmother's key. He decided to give it a bit longer time. While he was waiting for it, he lay down on his bed, and he began counting to 10 slowly. He got roughly to 5 before he fell asleep. He was awakened by dawn by little bear bawling at him. The Indian was standing outside the felt tepee on the edge of the table. His hands were cupped over his mouth as if he was shouting across a measureless canyon. As soon as Omri's eyes opened, the Indian shouted, "Day come! Why you sleep? Time eat, hunt, fight, make pictures!" Omri leapt up and he cried, "Wait!" He almost wrenched the cupboard door open. There on the shelf stood the small tepee made of real leather. Even the stitches on it were real. The poles and the twigs were all tied together with a strip of hide. The designs were made real Indian symbols with bright dyes. The car was still a toy car made of metal, no more real than it had ever been. "It works," breathed Omri, and then he caught his breath. "Little bear!" He shouted, "It works, it works, it works! I can make any plastic toy I like come alive, become real! It's real magic! Don't you understand? Magic!" The Indian stood calmly with his arms folded, evidently disapproving of this display of excitement. "So? Magic! The spirits work much magic. No need to wake dead with howls." Omri hastily pulled himself together. Never mind the dead. It was his parents he must be careful not to wake. He picked up the new tepee and set it down beside the one he had made the night before. "Here's the good one I promised you," he said. Little Bear examined it carefully. "No good," he said at last. "What? Why not?" "Good tepee, but not good Iroquois brave. See?" And he pointed to the painted symbols. "Not Iroquois signs. Algonquin. Little Bear sleep there. Iroquois spirits angry." "Oh," said Omri, disappointed. "Little Bear like Omri tepee. Need paint. Make strong pictures. Iroquois signs. Please spirits." Omri's disappointment melted. Into intense pride, he made a tepee that satisfied the Indian. "Well, it's not finished," he said. "I'll take it to school and finish it in handcrafts lesson. I'll take out the pins and sew it up properly. Then, when I come home, I'll give you the paints and you can paint your signs." "I paint, but must have longhouse. Tepee no good for Iroquois." Just for now?" Little Bear scowled. "Yes, but very short. Now eat." What would you like to eat in the morning?" "Meat," said the Indian immediately. Would you like some bread and cheese? Meat? Or corn or eggs? Meat. The Indian's arm was folded uncompromisingly across his chest. Okay, meat, said Omri with a sigh. Yes, well, I have to see what we can do in the meantime. I think I'd better put you down on the ground. Not on ground now? No, you're right high above. Go to the edge and look, but don't fall. The Indian took no chances. Lying on his stomach, he crawled commando fashion to the edge of the chest of drawers and peered over. Big mountain, he commented at last. Well, but it seemed too difficult to explain. May I lift you down? Little Bear stood up and looked at Omri measuringly. Not hold tight? He asked. No, I won't hold you at all. You can ride on my hand. So he laid the palm of his hand next to Little Bear, who after only a moment's hesitation stepped onto it. For greater stability, he sat down and crossed his legs. Omri gently transported him to the floor. The Indian rose lithely to his feet and jumped off into the gray carpet. At once he began to look around with suspicion. He dropped to his knees, felt the carpet, and smelled it. Not ground, he said. Blanket. Little Bear, look up. He obeyed, narrowing his eyes and peering. Do you see a sky? Do you see the sun? The Indian shook his head, all puzzled. That's because we're not outdoors. We're in a room of a house big enough for people like my size. You're not even in America. You're in England. The Indian's face lit up. English, good. Iroquois fight with English against French. Really? Asked Omri, wishing he had read more. Did you fight? Fight? Little Bear fight like mountain lion. Take many scalps. Scalps? Omri swallowed. How many? Little Bear proudly held up all 10 fingers, then closed his fists, opening them again to show another lot of 10, and then another. I don't believe it. You killed so many people, said Omri, shocked. Little Bear not lie. Great hunter, great fighter. Any white scalps? Omri ventured to ask. Oh, some French. Not take English scalps. Englishmen friends to Iroquois. Help Indian fight Algonquin enemy. Omri stared at him, and he suddenly wanted to get away. I'll go get you some meat, he said, choking in a choking voice. He went out of his room, closing the door behind him. For a moment, he did not move. He just leaned back against the door. He was sweating slightly. This was a bit more than he bargained for. Not only did his Indian was no mere toy that came to life, it was a real person, somehow magicked out of the past over 200 years ago. It occurred to Omri for the very first time that this idea of Indians, taken entirely from Western films, had been somehow really false. After all, those had actors playing Indians, afterwards wiping their war paint off, going home to have their dinners, not in teepees, but in a house like his. Little Bear was no actor. Omri swallowed hard. 30 scalps. Phew. Of course, things were different in those days. Those tribes were always making war with each other. And when you come to think of it, the English and French, they're always fighting for whatever they're doing, fighting in America. We're probably no better, killing each other like mad, like as often as they could. Even now, weren't soldiers doing the same thing? Weren't there wars and battles and terrorism going on all over the place? You couldn't switch on the television without seeing news about people killing or being killed. Were 30 scalps, even including some French ones, taken hundreds of years ago, that so very bad, after all? Still, when he tried to imagine Little Bear, full-size, bent over a French soldier, holding his hair in one hand and running the point of his scalping knife, yuck. Omri pushed away the door and walked unsteadily downstairs. No wonder he had felt from the very first slightly afraid of this Indian. He asked himself, swallowing repeatedly, that feeling that just the same that he might be sick, whether he wouldn't do better to just put Little Bear back in the cupboard, lock the door, and turn him back into plastic, knife and all. Down in the kitchen, he ransacked his mother's cupboard, found a tin of meat. He found some corned beef at last, and then he opened it with the tin opener on the wall. He dug a chunk out with a teaspoon, put it absent-mindedly into his own mouth, and began chewing. The Indian hadn't seemed very surprised about being in a giant house in England. He had shown that he was very superstitious, believing in magic and that the good and evil spirits. Perhaps he thought Omri as, well, some kind of genie or whatever Indians believed in instead. The, the wonder was that he wasn't more frightened of him, for genies or giants or spirits or whatever were always supposed to be very powerful. Omri supposed that if one happened to be the son of an Indian chief, or simply didn't get scared easily by ordinary things, especially perhaps if one had taken 30 scalps. Maybe Omri thought ought to tell someone about Little Bear. The trouble was, although the grown-ups usually know what to do, but what they usually do is seldom what children want to be done. What if they took the Indian, so say to some scientist or whomever knew about strange things like this? Who would question him and examine him and probably keep him in a laboratory or something of some sort? That would certainly want to take that cupboard away, too, and Omri wouldn't be able to have any more fun with it at all. Just when his mind was seething with ideas such as putting plastic bows and arrows and horses and maybe even other little people, well, no, probably that was too risky. Who knew what sort you might land up with? They might start fighting each other, but still, he knew for certain he didn't want to give up his secret. Well, not yet anyways, no matter how many Frenchmen had been scalped. However, having made this decision, for a moment anyways, Omri turned to go upstairs, discovering only halfway up the tin of corned beef was practically empty. Still, there was a fair-sized bit left on the bottom. It ought to do. Little Bear was nowhere to be seen, but when Omri called him softly, he ran out from under the bed and stood waving both arms. "Bring meat?" "Yes," Omri said, and he put the miniature plate that he had cut out the night before and placed it before the Indian, who seized it with both hands and began to gnaw on it. "Very good. Soft. Your wife cooked this?" Omri started to laugh. "I ain't got a wife." The Indian stopped and looked at him. "Omri? Not got wife? Who grow corn, grind, cook, make clothes?" "My mother," said Omri, still grinning. "Have you got a wife, then?" The Indian looked away. After a moment, he said, "No." "Well, why not?" "Dead," said Little Bear shortly. "Oh." The Little Bear finished eating in silence and stood up, wiping his greasy hands on the side of his trousers. "Now, do magic. Make things for Little Bear." "What do you want?" "Gun," he said promptly. "White man's gun, like English soldier." Omri's brain started to race. A tiny knife could stab, a tiny gun could shoot. Maybe it couldn't do as much harm, but then again, maybe it could. No gun. But I can make you some bows and arrows. I'll have to buy some plastic ones, though. What else? A horse? Horse? Little Bear seemed surprised. Don't you ride? I thought all Indians rode. Little Bear shook his head. No, Iroquois walk. But wouldn't you like to ride? Little Bear stood quite still, frowning, wrestling with this novel idea. He said, "Maybe. Show horse. Then I see." Again, Omri rummaged through his biscuit tin. There were a number of horses here, big heavy ones for carrying armored knights, smaller ones for pulling gun carriages in the Napoleonic Wars, several cavalry horses. Those might be the best, Omri thought. Omri arranged 5 or 6 of various size colors before Little Bear, whose black eyes began to shine. "I have," he said promptly. "You mean you want all of them?" Little Bear nodded hungrily. "Uh-huh." "No, that's too much. I can't have herds of horses galloping all over my room. You can choose one." "One?" Little Bear said sadly. "One." Little Bear then made a very thorough examination of every horse, feeling their legs, running his hands over their rumps, looking straight into their eyes and their plastic faces, and at last he selected a smallish brown horse with 2 white feet, had originally, as Omri could remember, carried an Arab, brandishing a curved sword in a platoon of the French Foreign Legionnaires. Omri lifted the cupboard onto the floor, shut the horse in it, turned the key, and almost immediately you could hear the clatter of the hooves on the metal. They looked at each other with joyful faces. "Open door! Open door!" commanded Little Bear. Omri lost no time in doing so. There, prancing and pawing on the white paint, was a lovely, shiny-coated little brown Arab horse. As the door swung open, he shied nervously, turning his face and pricking his ears so far forward that they almost met the foreback. His tiny nostrils flared. His black tail plumed over the haunches as he gave a high, shrill neigh. "Aye!" cried Little Bear. In a moment he had vaulted over the bottom of the edge of the cupboard, and, as the horse reared in fright, jumped into the air under the flying hooves and grasped the leather reins. The horse fought to free its head, but Little Bear hung on with both hands. Even as the horse plunged and bucked, the Indian had moved from front to side, grasping the high pommel of the saddle, and swung himself right onto it. He ignored the swinging stirrups, holding on and gripping with his knees. The horse flung himself back on his haunches, then threw himself forward in a mighty buck, head low, heels flying high. To Omri's dismay, Little Bear, instead of clinging on, somehow came loose, flew through the air in a curve, landing in the carpet just beyond the edge of the cupboard. Omri thought, oh no, his neck must be broken, but he had landed in some sort of somersault and was instantly back on his feet again. The face turned to Omri with shining happiness. "Crazy horse!" he cried with fierce delight. The crazy horse was meanwhile standing quite still, reins hanging loose, looking watchfully at the Indian, wide eyes apart. Little Bear made no sudden moves. He stood quite still for a very long time, just looking back at the horse. Then so slowly you could scarcely notice, he edged himself towards, making strange hissing noises between his clenched teeth that almost seemed to hypnotize the horse. Inch by inch, moved slowly and cautiously until the horse stood almost nose to nose. Then quite calmly, Little Bear reached and laid his hand on the horse's neck. That was all. He did not hold the reins. The horse could have jumped away, but he didn't. It raised its nose a little, so the Indians seemed to be breathing into each other's nostrils. Then, in a quiet voice, Little Bear said, "Now, horse, mine. Crazy horse, mine." Still moving slowly, though not so slowly as before, he took the reins and moved alongside the horse. After a certain amount of fiddling, he found how to unbuckle the straps of the Arabian saddle. He lifted it off, laying it on the floor. The horse snorted and tossed his head, but didn't move. Hissing gently, the Indian first leaned his weight against the horse's side, then lifted him up by his arms until he was astride, letting the reins lay loose in the horse's neck. He squeezed with his legs. The horse moved forward, as tame and obedient as you please, and the pair rode around the inside of the cupboard as if it had been a circus arena. Suddenly, Little Bear caught the reins and pulled. He pulled them to one side, turning the horse's head at the same time, kicking him sharply. The horse wheeled and bounded forward to the edge of the cupboard. The metal rim was up to the small horse's chest, like a 5-barrel gate to a full-sized horse. There was no room to ride straight at it. From a back in the cupboard to the front, Little Bear rode diagonally at a very difficult angle, yet the horse cleared it in a flying leap. Omri realized at once that the carpet was too soft for him. His feet simply sank into the soft sand like soft sand. "Need ground, not blanket," said Little Bear very sternly. "Blanket not good for ride." Omri looked at his clock. It was only a little after 6 in the morning, at least an hour before there would be anybody else up. "I could take you outside," he said hesitantly. "Good," said Little Bear, "but do not touch horse. You touch, much fear." So Omri quickly found a small cardboard box that he had held the matchbox lorry. It even had a sort of window through which he could see what was happening inside. He laid it on the carpet with the end flaps open. Little Bear rode the horse into the box, and Omri carefully shut the end up to even more carefully lifted it. Then in his bare feet he carried the box slowly down the stairs and let himself out through the back door. It was a lovely, fresh spring morning. Omri stood on the back steps with the box in his hands, looking around for a suitable spot. The lawn wasn't much good. The grass would be over the Indian's head in most places. The terrace, At the foot of the steps, that was no use at all either. It was just hard with uneven bricks and cracks between them. But the path was beaten earth and small stones, real riding ground if they were careful. Omri walked to the path and laid the matchbox carton down. For a moment he hesitated. Could this Indian run away? How fast could such a small horse run? As fast as maybe a mouse? If so, and they wanted to escape, Omri would never be able to catch him. But a cat would, on the other hand. Omri knelt down on the pajamas with his pajamas on the path, face to face with the cellophane window. The Indian stood inside, holding his horse's head. "Little bear," he said clearly, "we are outdoors now. I'm going to let you out to ride, but remember, you are not on the prairie right now. There are mountain lions here. They are big enough to swallow you and the horse whole. Don't run away. You wouldn't survive. Do you understand?" Little Bear looked at him steadily and nodded. Omri opened the flap, and the Indian and the horse stepped out onto the morning sunlight. What do you think's going to happen? Do you think they'll try to escape? Or do you think something might try to get them? I will read chapter 4 tomorrow. Good night.